Welcome to the No Plateau podcast for stroke and brain injury survivors, their caregivers, and the therapists helping them to break boundaries in their recovery journey. Hosted by Henry Hoffman, a certified occupational and clinical therapist, and Pete Duran, a certified podcast host, CPH. Look it up. This podcast is intended to supplement stroke and brain injury survivors' recovery journey. Therefore, all content affiliated with this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the No Plateau podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Pete Duran. Henry Hoffman, our esteemed occupational therapist expert, is also on the call with me. Welcome, Henry, as usual.
Hey, Pete.
And we have two guests that I'm very excited about talking to, Jennifer and Michael Erwin. Their story is wonderful, and it's not just the usual story about, stroke and recovery. It's also about what these two wonderful humans are doing for other people who have been through the same situation. And that will be the focus of our episode, is kind of what happens when everybody starts to disappear and it's just the two of you and the insurance runs out. What now? Right? That's what we're going to get into. So welcome, Michael and Jennifer.
Thank you for having us.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure. So let's step back. I think we need to set the stage. The story of September 10th, 2017. By the way, everybody has a start date, right, to their journey.
Yes, I do.
So walk us through a little bit of what happened that morning, and then we'll kind of tease out some of the key parts of the journey that I think started to impact your thinking.
I'll let you start it.
You want me to start it?
Yeah.
Since you don't remember much.
Yeah, you don't.
Well, it was and I apologize. Today of all days, we've got landscapers here. I don't know if you can hear them in the back.
You're fine. We can't hear any of it.
We're
All
good.
right. It was a Sunday morning, and we woke up very early. We were lying in the bed watching TV, having conversation. And I'd like to also say 3 months prior to this, Michael had his physical, annual physical, everything checked out. He was healthy, active, ate well, that sort of thing. But anyways, we had a conversation that morning, and we always go back and forth who's going to get up first. So I'm not a morning person. So he was voted to get out of bed and get in the shower first. So literally from going to a conversation with him to him getting up out of the bed, he started kind of rocking back and forth. We're always kind of joking with each other. So I thought he was just joking around. So, I was pushing him out of the bed, and I said something to him. And when he went to speak back, I immediately could tell something was wrong. And the other kind of strange, funny thing that happened before that, I just had CPR class at my place of work, and they go over strokes as well. So all that, and my mom had a minor incident the week before. So it was like all this stuff was already in my head. So I immediately knew what was going on, and I jumped in front of him to look at his face, and it was very obvious. So I grabbed the phone right then, and we actually lived 3 miles at the time. We lived 3 miles from a major hospital that was a stroke center as well. And the fire department was literally like a mile down the road. So as I was on the phone, they were asking me to do the stroke test for him. And of course, that's what it was. I could hear the sirens, and I did not think it was for us because it was that quick.
Wow.
And so we lived in a three-floor townhouse at the time. So the 911 dispatcher was like, "That's for you. Go down and go out the front door and make sure they see who you are." So of course, time is everything with the stroke. So we were very blessed. We had EMTs on the scene, no joke, within 5 minutes, I would say.
Wow.
So they were on the scene, and then ambulance right behind them. And because it was a Sunday morning in the city, it was a ghost town, no traffic. So he was at the hospital probably within, no more than 30 minutes and being treated. So I credit that because it was a hemorrhagic stroke. So I credit that, of course, to him having, no more deficits and because the area of the stroke for him was right above the brainstem, which, in the area of the brain that affects his balance and mobility. But he did not lose any of his cognitive skills ever. He did have trouble speaking. I don't know the right term. It's not such a thing, I guess, as slight aphasia, but he did have trouble communicating for a few weeks.
Well, The interesting thing about that, I used a lot of $10 words. I used these big words, I guess, from college. But Jennifer and the
When you were able to start.
yeah, when I was able to, and the speech therapist really didn't believe I was using real words, and they were looking the words up. And sure enough, but the simple words of and, go, stop, I couldn't use, but I could find these big words. Who knows?
Usually swearing and singing is no problem. Anything
Yeah.
else, forget it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I think, Jennifer, like your point is with the type of stroke that Michael had, it represents a small percentage of overall strokes, but a very high mortality rate. So, pretty serious prognosis. And, from there, walk us through, once you heard exactly what it was, you guys spent, you spent 36 days in the hospital after that. Jennifer, I'm curious, and we'll get to Michael with a question here in a minute. What's your first reaction? And, did you have any idea what was going to, what life was going to be like for the next 90 days? What was your first question to someone in the hospital?
To give you some more background, I have a sister who passed away years ago as a result of a brain injury she sustained in a car accident.
Okay.
So I knew the worst of it, and she had injury to the brainstem. So when they told me initially his stroke was near the brainstem, I just, that's of course the memory that came to me. But at the same time, I could see in his eyes like he was still with me. Like I could see there was something, even though he couldn't communicate and he had no idea what was going on. And honestly, over years of grieving and the what ifs and all that with my sister, I knew I could only live in that moment. I knew I could not think further than that. I knew I had to just live in that very moment. And of course, with most stroke survivors, any major circumstances, the first 3 days was more crucial. That's all they would tell us is we can get through these 3 days. We'll see what life is, what the plan is for him. So honestly, I just went moment by moment. I did a lot of praying and I just lived moment by moment. But I can honestly say I did not think doom and gloom.
Okay.
I didn't get upset. I was just here for him and making sure he felt the support and he didn't give up. Because like I said, I could tell he was in there.
Yep. Well, I think when we talk with caregivers, and we're going to spend a little time on this later, it's an amazing journey of, first of all, while we're in the moment, you just react. You just do what you need to do, call 911. Next thing you know, you're in the next moment. And then in the next moment, most don't have experience with brain injury the way you did. So they don't have a conceived idea what's about to happen. So, Michael, tell us about, those first 3 days. When did you wake up and kind of realize and talk to Jennifer about what's kind of happening? When did you start to learn what was going on?
I think it was more when I got out of ICU, and that was probably 8 to 10 days. Was it that long? Okay. They got me to speech and physical and occupational therapy. It was really difficult. I think the first thing that really hit me about what was happening was I went to speech therapy, and she asked me what the antonym was for go. And I said, well, it's easy.
I thought that was
easy. And suddenly I couldn't give it to her. But I knew it. And then she asked me some synonyms, and it became real frustrating. And all I know was I went back to my room, and I just sat there and thought, my leg's a noodle, my arm's a noodle, I can't hardly talk, and something is wrong with my brain. Your life can be much worse than that. I thought, what in the world is going on? And all I did was pray a lot and keep working at the therapy, and suddenly a lot of things started to come back.
I do want to add with that, his memory of the very first day is, of course, a bit cloudy. And the most heartbreaking moment for me was after that. We were at the inpatient rehab center at this point, and later that night, he was very anxious and, just trying to process all this. And he was asking me then, what is happening? What happened to me? So I slowly explained everything, but tried to, as positively as I could. And I was telling him what was ahead of him as far as, and I explained it in the rewiring your brain conversation. And he, at that moment, he had the most helpless look on his face. And he was like, probably gonna get emotional telling you, he was like, well, you know me. He said, you do it. And it was almost like he was having this childlike moment, and
Right.
he said, you know me, you do it. You do it. And I was like, I can't help you. And it was just,
Right.
it was very heartbreaking. That was the most heartbreaking moment. It was just him kind of absorbing, like, this is not a physical thing.
Right.
Right.
It's something we can't
Well-
control, and it's going to take time. It's going to.
That's normal. It's a normal process when you go through that, especially early on. It's kind of going
Right.
through the stages of shock as you're still trying to figure things out. But if we can take a couple steps back, you said something that was definitely above average that I hear. Paramedics were there within 5 minutes. That's definitely above average.
Yes.
And the other thing that I don't hear often is you were in the hospital within 30 minutes.
Yes.
Many
At a stroke
times.
center. Yeah.
Yeah, many
In a stroke
times, and I'm
center.
sure you've probably heard the same story talking to many stroke survivors as we later get into your foundation. They're in the waiting room for hours, and you're literally going. You're watching them. If there was a camera in the waiting room, you're watching your loved one go from more function to less function each hour.
Right.
And we've had examples where people could walk into the bathroom the first hour, and then they're still waiting, and now they're limping to the bathroom the second hour, and then they're still waiting. I mean, we had people 4 or 5 hours. These are stroke centers.
Yeah.
So it is shocking. So thank goodness you all got the attention you got as soon as you did. But circling back with that subacute stage of stroke, right? So you had your acute stage. That was the first few days, stabilize. Michael's alive. Hooray. That's step one. Step
Right.
two is you go into therapy, and you're trying to, as you said, Jennifer, rewire the brain through PTOT speech. Sometimes they do a great job with the recovery, and sometimes therapists in hospitals, you'll hear stories where they didn't do a great job. And I have a big gripe of what that means as far as the best recovery possible versus therapists doing compensatory strategies to get you independent so they can kick you out as soon as possible.
Right.
Looking back at your 2 to 4 weeks of inpatient rehab, from your perspective, what did the therapists and the doctors get right, and where did they fall short?
In my opinion, from the acute care, they were great. It was more about stabilizing him, making sure he was going to make it through. And then once we got to the inpatient rehab center, I think all that was pretty great in my opinion.
With the exception, my hearing was very sensitive.
Yeah.
And my vision was very sensitive. In fact, I wore sunglasses.
Yeah.
I have always questioned, and I don't know the answer. It drove me crazy because they took me in rehab with so many other people that were basically rehabbing for this reason or that reason. I couldn't stand they had fluorescent lights, and I kept telling the girl that it was really hurting my eyes, and my hearing was very sensitive. I couldn't hardly listen to her because my hearing was so sensitive.
Yeah, that was his complaint. When he couldn't focus, he was having sensory overload, and they just kind of shrugged it off and said, well, you're going to have to get used to this. You're going to have to deal with it. So he would kind of shut down and couldn't give it all he had. That was probably the only complaint about that.
Yes.
Was they weren't listening to him. And you don't know what you don't know. So we thought, okay, he's going to have to deal with this. So as far as inpatient rehab, I think it was I don't have a comparison. We don't have a comparison, but I think it was pretty great. We were disappointed at the next step at the outpatient.
Outpatient, yeah.
Well, that's what I was going to
That's
ask
what
you
we
next is,
We were very
yeah,
disappointed.
and this is, well, thanks for teeing that up perfectly for me, Jennifer.
Sorry.
As you transition, oh, it's great. As you transition from inpatient, usually you go home.
Mhm.
Maybe there's some home care visits, and then you
And the
transition
home
to
care was
hopefully,
actually great. The home care was
Good.
great. Yeah.
good, and then you transition to where the real rewiring process begins,
Right.
is the outpatient center. And I got to tell you, and this is a two-part question. This is where you make or break your recovery. You know, we've heard from hundreds and hundreds of patients where the experience was awful, right? And these are the ones that typically go to centers where they don't really primarily see neurotherapists. And
Right.
when I think about centers that don't see neurotherapists, I'm referring, for the audience, I'm referring to these clinics where they'll have maybe 1 or 2 stroke patients on caseload, and the rest are shoulder, knees, maybe it's pulmonary, maybe it's cardiac. That's not ideally where you want your family member going if you suffered a neurological injury. You want to find a neuro center. So my question for you, the two-part question is obviously, discuss your outpatient experience, but also I always recommend patients interview, just like they're interviewing for any other large purchase. You interview, right? You want to get the best product. If you did interview, or if you would interview, and I definitely recommend that, what would be, now going through this process, what would be those top 2 or 3 questions you think you should ask that therapist or clinic to make sure the patient's making the right choice with that facility? Okay, fire away.
Well, we went to this one center because it was within the same network, hospital and extension, and it was recommended by the home therapist. We didn't know. And of course his experience and was probably completely different. Who knows when he had that experience to give us a recommendation, because we really, valued his opinion. So when we got there, I did not like it at all, but it was very clinical. It was very depressing. It was actually a children's hospital that had an outpatient center for adults there. So, it was a very depressing situation because you walk through the children's hospital area first to get all the way to the back, and then you wait. It was just a very depressing situation. But like I said, I didn't have anything to compare it to. 30 or 45-minute sessions, and then by the time you got through all the checking in and the paperwork and all that, he was lucky to get 20 minutes of therapy. And this is with all 3, speech, OT, and PT. And we had to drive a good distance to get there. So, we had to kind of manage his fatigue and that sort of thing, and manage his appointments. And so I kept thinking, it's going to get better. It's going to get better. It's going to get better. And then one thing that really set me off, but it was toward the end, they were trying to push, instead of working with him to begin with,
Yes.
they immediately started in the PT area. They immediately started to push equipment that would make his body work, and trying to get us to buy this very expensive equipment that wasn't covered by insurance. So they immediately jumped into that without working really with him. And so that's when his feisty side started coming out, and he started asking questions. They were just not very positive therapists. They looked like to be honest, they looked like they hated their job. It was not a positive experience at all. And so by the time we kind of figured it out, well, then insurance ran out. So it was kind of like I was learning at the same time. And during all this, I'm doing as much research and reading as quick as I can about it, and trying to do what I can at home with him. And he even received a lecture one day. He spoke up to the therapist, and we never saw anyone in charge. He spoke up to the therapist one day because his whole PT session was them trying to get this equipment to work while he sat there. So when it was his OT appointment was right behind that. So he was so flustered, and the therapist, asked him what was wrong. And so he told her. She proceeded to give him a lecture.
Oh, that's ridiculous. First of all,
about their time.
Yeah, nothing's worse than that patronizing attitude where they think that, they're above you as a clinician, above the patient. And that's the problem with healthcare in general, the perception of we're bothering the nurse, we're bothering the
Right.
doctor, we're bothering the therapist. It's absolutely ridiculous. And yeah, you are wasting your
Yeah.
shopping dollars trying to
Yeah,
figure out
exactly.
how to use a product. So you were right to do that. And that's very frustrating. So clearly it sounds like part two here is you went to a different place. And I'm
Yes.
curious, now that you went through that experience, to get to my original question, if you were going to tell another stroke survivor, hey, look, before you sign up with anyone, ask these questions, what would be the one or two or three questions?
I do. And I take that approach. I said, you got to interview them. You got to find out. But the first thing I did was look for the facilities that had the neuro rehab. I had learned enough and educated myself that I learned exactly what you said, that he needed to be somewhere that specialized in neuro rehab. And I also looked for people that gave more time than 30 minutes.
Good.
It just happened that I found a place that was very in a different town, but closer to my office, my work office. So it worked out, and they gave hour-long visits. The whole experience was like night and day. This was a private facility, of course. It was founded by two therapists that used to work in a hospital. They got tired of being held back by all the policies and rules, so they started their own independent facility. So they got it. They understood the frustration of it.
The big difference I'll never forget, because I was still in a wheelchair. I came from an environment where they kept telling me, you may be in the wheelchair the rest of your life.
No hope.
And the therapist looked at me and she said, if you will listen to me and you will follow my instructions, you will walk around our building, which was a quarter of a mile, without a cane. And I said, sign me up. I don't know whether I believe you, but you just made awful big goal, and
That's awesome.
Try it. So she was excellent.
There's two segues to the second part of this episode that we're going to touch on now. The first one is, this is just like, unfortunately, healthcare is a business. And, when you walk into a Chick-fil-A, the experience you have is very different than walking into most other fast food restaurants. They sell fast food, but they've created an environment where the people they hire, the training they go through, and the expected way they treat their customers is at a completely different level, and is very difficult for other companies to duplicate. For some reason, it's not magic.
No.
They just don't duplicate it because it has to be at the core of their values. So you experienced one facility, they were basically equipped and had people in there who had educational background to do what they were supposed to do. But culture, attitude, everything was, and by the way, the physical environment, you mentioned walking through the hallways, the lighting, everything about it just wasn't there. And it's all fixable, right? But then Henry made a good point. You chose to take your business elsewhere, and then you had to take it out of your own pocket.
Yes.
Right. So to pay for it yourself. And this is where your journey with the Believe Stroke Recovery Foundation begins, because you realized, we're blessed, we're in a position to do this, but other people are not. And one of the things we believe, and that's one of the reasons we started this podcast and call it No Plateau, is just what you described. That's just one point in your journey. It's not the end point. Anybody that tells you you're going to be in a wheelchair the rest of your life misses the point. Stroke recovery is really hard. That's very true, but it can be done. We had Henry, our last guest, wonderful guest. Can't wait for you to listen to the episode. He said something I had not realized, and I'm curious about your opinion on this, because I've never had a stroke. I came from a fitness background where I would train people who over years and years and years let their health decline, right? They gained weight, they could stop, they couldn't do certain things. They had become accustomed to that. You, on the other hand, on Saturday in 2017, were fine.
Right.
So your memory of what normal is normal. The next day you're not. So when a therapist gets excited because you can pick up a pen, you're like, no, yesterday I was writing movie scripts.
Right.
Picking up the pen isn't enough for me. So when you stepped into this Steps for Recovery, no pun intended, facility, what were the first things that they focused on with you to begin your journey back?
I remember him focusing on my leg. Occupational therapy, which we'll get to at a later point.
I mean, like the initial, I want to interject a little bit. First of all, they wanted to know him.
Okay.
They took the time initially to talk to him and get to know him and I could tell they were trying to gauge his personality and mine as well. So that was an immediate plus for me. Like they were truly trying, because not everything works for everybody. So they took the time to have conversation with us and about, his past life, what he was doing formerly, what his likes, and that, none of that came up before.
That's important.
Well, I always say that a therapist is basically, they are compassionate, they are a motivator. They kick you in the ass if you need it, and they become your best friend. Really, I mean, forever.
Like a psychiatrist.
Yeah, I mean, for 2 years, 3 years, you go every week or 2 times, 3 times a week. That's who you see.
Right.
That is your life.
And that's incredibly true, right? And they took the time to get to know you, Michael, but also you, Jennifer, which I think is really important, right? The caregiver is a key part of this.
Right.
We attribute that when you're in inpatient therapy in the hospital and even aggressive outpatient therapy, that therapist is kind of the superhero, right? And the caregiver is kind of the sidekick. But when you go home and you begin to try to rebuild your normal life, Jennifer and the caregiver are kind of the superhero because they're there 99% of the time. And that therapist becomes the sidekick who can help advise. Those roles are important. And I think that's one of the things we're beginning to understand at Sabo is how important that caregiver role is for long-term recovery.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And sometimes you don't want to be the caregiver, Jennifer, you just want to be the wife, right?
Exactly.
You don't want to be the motivator. You don't want to be the ass kicker, as Michael put it. Cheerleader. And by the way, initially, right, when you mentioned Michael earlier, it was probably 7 or 8 days before you realized what was going on after you had the stroke. Jennifer's the one talking to the doctors, doing the research, trying to figure out what to do next, right? Some of that is missed. Let's shift quickly into the Believe Foundation and talk about what inspired you to start it, what you're doing with it, and how other people who are listening to this, who certainly are going to be around the stroke community, can get involved and help. So I'm just going to turn it over to you guys and introduce it.
Well, I think it had been like 7 months, and I was still in a wheelchair, and I didn't know what I was going to do in my life. I had been always used to working. I asked Jennifer, I said, I'm at a loss. All my life I had worked. What do I do with my life at this point? And she said, pray about it. And I said, well, I guess you're absolutely right. That has been the one place I haven't looked that I should have. And so I started praying, asking God, what should I do with my life? And one day, I think it had been about 30 days, I had a vision, if you want to call it that. You need to open a nonprofit. Believe it or not, I even came with a name, Believe. And I thought, I don't know where I got that. I said, nah, I just had that dream. And so I didn't think much about it. And then I had the dream again. I said, wow, that's weird. And so I had it the third time. I said, okay, I guess there is something to this because, as you put it, I had already put 2 and 2 together what this rehab was going to cost us. For the next 2 years, we basically were going to pay out of pocket for 20 of the 24 months. So it was going to be very expensive. Funny as it may be, I decided to negotiate with God. And I said, if you're really wanting me to do this, let me walk around that building. And so it was weird. That was July of 2018. And then
Are you challenging God? Am I hearing you?
Yes, I
challenge
did.
God?
I did.
I'm like, what are
I know. I
I
should
didn't know
have
about any of
done.
this.
You're
Oh,
clever.
the cojones on this one, he said.
Oh, man. So, and in January of 2019, I walked around that building. I had an AFO on my leg, but I walked without a cane, without any assistance. I walked around that building. And I
Michael,
said,
let me pause for
wow.
1 second. I had a vision of Forrest Gump running and the braces falling off as he's run. Forrest, was there a run, Michael, run moment there?
I was so excited that I could walk. I didn't, oh gosh.
It felt
That
like
is amazing.
Yes, I did. Today, I walk around here in the neighborhood and so forth without the cane. Pretty
So-
exciting stuff.
So let's, before you dive into Believe a little bit more and what you guys are doing currently, if we unpack that for a little bit. By the way, isn't it funny how we go to pray sometimes as a last resort when it should be the first resort? So
Yes.
that's number one. That's my little stick. And the name Believe is unbelievable. No pun intended. I love the name Believe because we do have to believe. And Jennifer, from the caregiver standpoint, Pete brought up a good point. I mean, you guys definitely, you get the cape on right when he comes home, right? We might as well come up, Pete, with a logo with the caregiver cape, and
Yeah.
and we ship it to the clients because they deserve it with a little package, a little getting started package for the Jennifers out there, because there's so much you have to do. And before you dive deep into the whole Believe Foundation, Jennifer, from your perspective as a caregiver, what are you recommending? Right, every 40 seconds, there's another Jennifer, another caregiver helping another
Right.
Michael every 40 seconds. Tomorrow, there's gonna be a bunch of Jennifers. So what do you want to tell them if they're in a room with you to calm their fears and kind of get them started in the next 30-day journey? What can you share as you transition into the Believe Foundation?
Well, as dark as it may seem, it does get better. From that moment, it does get better. But what I tell most people is shut out the negativity. I don't care. I know there are extreme cases where, it is harder to come back. But
Yep.
even if you're on that extreme case, you can't look at it. You don't know. There's lots of this, so you don't know. So I try to tell them not to, kind of shut out the negativity and educate themselves. And that's really what I had to do, because even the information I received while he was in ICU basically just explained a stroke, like definition, and it was horrible. It was no hope in that. It just explained what a stroke was. So I was a nervous wreck reading that. So I immediately started, ordering books and, going online, and that's all I did while he laid there and I didn't know what the recovery was going to be. I took that time to educate myself. But now I know not only educating myself about stroke recovery, I know now to tell people to educate themselves about what resources are around them as far as, where the neuro rehabs are and that sort of thing. So I add that but yeah, it's really just educate yourself. And some people, it breaks my heart, they don't have a support system, but it's out there. And unfortunately, the caregiver has to add that to their list of things to do, is to find the support. Because it's not immediately available for you. Because a lot of the policies with the hospital, they can't give you all this. They can't give you direction. They just hand you something. Even like with the outpatient rehab, the inpatient rehabs, it was a list, and it was basically what your insurance could cover and who had a bed available. That's how you really don't get to choose. That's how it was for us, anyways. It was what our insurance would cover and who had a bed available. They may have been a better circumstance out there, but we don't have anything for comparison, so I don't know. But it's tough to talk to caregivers, like try to keep them, try to keep them up. But it's support. They need support somehow. But that's what we need to work on.
That brings us to Believe. So where are you, Michael?
I want to talk to Jennifer just a second, because we forget a little bit about the caregiver or their wife. I just sit here and I am a ball of nerves, I guess. I practically go to tears when I think about what all Jennifer had to do. I mean, she took, oh, I was used to handling all the finances. She had to take over. I came home and I couldn't get up. She had to get me in the shower. She had to move me here and there all during the night. What she had to take care of was really, I look at the caretaker and I don't know if they have it any worse than a stroke survivor. I mean, they are flat living it with us.
You're darn right, Michael. And I don't know, I haven't shared the story with you yet, but when I left the step out event, I happened to park next to a couple that was there, and they were in their 80s. I'm not sure if you remember them. He was in a scooter, like in a little Amigo scooter, right?
Yes.
Yep. I had talked to them earlier in the day, and I happened to be parked right next. So I pulled, I was bringing all my stuff back to pack in the back of the truck, in my truck, and they have a Chevy Suburban. They pull the scooter up. Remember, they're in their mid 80s. It's about 88 degrees outside. It's hot. And I'm watching this, and she gets him up, gets a walker out of the back, and he leans against the truck holding onto the walker. And then she pops the tailgate. Now, this isn't a handicap access van. This is a Chevy Suburban, which is like 3 feet off the ground. I just looked at her and I said, ma'am, are you going to put that in the back of the truck? She said, yes. And I said, there is no way I can watch you do that. Would you mind if I help? And her husband said, I would be very grateful if you could help. Like, right, Michael, that's what she said. I'd be very grateful. I said, there's no way I'm helping you do this. What amazed me, in 4.5 seconds, she had broken that thing down. And I happen to know this thing weighs 200 pounds into 4 pieces that each weighed 50 pounds, which is still a lot of weight. And I lifted each piece up, and she had a very special place in the back of the truck to get it in there so it would all fit. And I looked at her and I said, you do that every time you go somewhere? She said, when I get them out, and then I do it again when I put them back in. And I just hugged her. I said, you're my hero. I mean, you're in your mid-80s. She goes, it helps me stay in shape so I can do everything I need to do at home for him. And they were still out in the community doing it, right? They didn't sit home and they came out to support your event and your cause and the Believe Foundation. But Michael, you're right. I think it's, and by the way, she was a wonderful woman. I'm sure she has days where she just wants to punch her hand through a wall, right? It just happens. Yeah. So and we're going to talk offline, because Henry and I are working on a project to do what we just described, because that should never happen, right? What she's doing should never have to happen. For you to go home, Jennifer, and try to figure out how to get Michael in the shower at night should never have to happen. We need to solve this problem, because there's a lot of other things besides the products you use when you're inpatient or outpatient or whatever. Just living a normal life is enough of a challenge. So we're working on a way to solve that. That's not what this program is about. Help us, if you could describe to people listening to the program, what's the main objective of the Believe Foundation? What are you trying to offer?
Well, the main thing, we launched Believe last September. The main objective or the mission of Believe is really to provide financial assistance to stroke survivors or to individuals that have incurred a TBI or brain injury after they have exhausted their insurance. And we're slowly gaining traction. Right now, ever since the event, Step Out with Shrek Warriors.
And the COVID restrictions have been lifted.
We currently have 11 individuals that we are handling their financial grantee.
Outpatient?
Yes, outpatient, and we're helping their rehab costs. So we're very, very excited about it, and we're using 3 different rehab facilities, and so far everybody's doing very well. But 2 of the individuals, just to give you an idea, are 19 and 21. The 19-year-old had a TBI. The 21-year-old had a stroke. We feel very good about what we're doing, and we feel very blessed. We feel blessed that someone comes to us and we're able to help them. There are, as you know, there are hundreds of foundations out there that do a lot for awareness. But as far as I know, we are the only foundation, one of the very few, that helps stroke survivors and TBI. And so, we receive phone calls, or I receive emails from all over the US and wanted to know if I can help them. And so far, we've been very limited to North Carolina. And I think we'll probably end up staying that way. We would help anybody open a facility, but we try to vet the rehab centers. So we won't go just anywhere, and we've been very fortunate so far.
So Michael and Jennifer, a couple of questions pop into mind that I want to make sure we get answered for the people listening to the program. Okay. So the last point you made, I think, is really important. You don't want anyone to experience the first place you went to for outpatient, right? You want to avoid that. So you're making sure that if you're going to help someone, they're going to get to a facility and to people in a culture that care and are wired the right way. So that's important. So quality is very high. Number two, if someone does, because one of the questions I had when I first met you is, how do you fund all this, right? I mean, you have to fund it. So I know on the website, people can donate in increments. You do a great job describing what that donation would do for someone.
Yes.
How are you getting the word out to drive up bigger donations? How can people help drive additional funding into the belief? Because you're right. Henry and I talked to a lot of folks. Very few people are in the do phase. They're in the awareness phase, but the do phase is harder. Right. So what are your thoughts on driving fundraising to a level to expand care and reach?
Well, that is part of what we're trying to figure out right now.
Okay.
And for now, we're able to, support these people, but those funds are going to run out. But we have received tremendous support. The silver lining out of COVID is how much went online and virtually and all that. So we were actually able to gain support just by, asking, sending emails and spreading the word. And we had a huge amount of support from family and friends, but we've also had a huge amount of support from strangers who have lost a loved one, a lot of them who've lost a loved one to stroke or have a connection with stroke or brain injury that they want to give back somehow. And so they send in donations with a story. Even when they find out we're only in North Carolina right now, we have people from all over the country that still will send in financial support for us. We're actually in the, since we just had a step out event, we're trying to figure out how to get the fundraising where we need it to be. And that's just part of our, we're still pretty green right now. So we're trying to figure that out.
I'll tell you what, having started a couple companies, nothing's real until you get your first customer. So the fact that you're treating 11 people already is there's proof in the pudding. Every dollar helps. But Henry and I will have a side conversation with you after the podcast. We've done some crowdfunding, and we were amazed, right, Henry, at the thousands of people who have been touched by stroke or brain injury who are willing to help. So we definitely want to throw our network at this and talk about some other formal fundraising experience we have with large organizations, because I think there are some partnerships in addition to the individuals that can help with this. I, for one, have been so amazed when Henry gave me a book when I first started working at Saba, by the way. He said, read this book, learn something, young man. And I learned about stroke, but reading the book was amazing. But talking with people like you and being inspired by people who have, life's tough, and yet you get up every day facing your own personal challenges and try to help other people. To me, this is why humanity is such a cool thing, and more people need to be aware of this kind of thing. Henry, I don't know if you have any thoughts on closing thoughts for Jennifer and Michael.
Yeah, my first one was I didn't know what book you were going to say, if it was that one or How to Do a Podcast for Dummies or other books I've sent your way. I didn't know what book you're referring to.
Apparently I didn't read the book How to Do a Podcast.
You're making my arm come up.
How to adjust volume for Michael and Jennifer. No, we had a little glitch prior to this podcast, folks.
Yeah.
So to ditto what Pete said, and just having spent the last 30, 45 minutes with you guys. I've been doing this for a long time, so sometimes I get desensitized because the conversations are always the same. This one was a little different, and I think that the message was different. Michael's journey is different. What you, Jennifer, and you're doing for the Believe Foundation is different. It's truly amazing to know that, everything happens for a reason.
Yeah.
1 out of every 4 families are touched by stroke. So you're getting into an industry that's needed, and there's a major void. So good news, bad news. The good news is you're doing something that is needed, and there's no shortage. The bad news is you had to experience it to get to this point, right? But the journey is starting every day. And just like neuroplasticity, there's no expiration date. There's no expiration date on giving to people that need it. And so I applaud you for your 11 lives you're changing. That's amazing. And I'm hoping Sabo can do their small part to help your organization, and we'll do our best to promote it so we can make that 11 hundreds, and that will be amazing for the North Carolina.
We will put the links to the Believe Foundation donation page in the show notes, and then Henry and I will also be promoting this on LinkedIn on the Sabo channel, as well as our individual channels as well, and getting the message out. It's such a powerful message and story. Before we go, Jennifer, Michael, any final things you'd like to say to someone who's struggling financially to deal with this that could offer them that last bit of hope besides clicking on the URL?
My thought would be that nothing is more entitled to an individual than realizing self-independence. So you need to realize that, really, to be excited about life again. They talk about so many stroke survivors. They estimate anywhere from what?
It's a lot.
It's a lot. Anyway, they estimate that a lot of people stay home and are very depressed. And I think getting out, I'll never forget the first time after I walked up there, I went to a sports bar. It was the first time I've been to a sports bar in 2 years, I guess.
That's great.
And I sat there right in front of all the TVs. And so I was all by myself. And I got to do what I enjoy, which was watching and knowing what was going on with sports and eating at the same time. I think I went every day for the first 30 days. I just couldn't get enough.
Regular.
So I think we all today, and Sabo I know is one of them, there are resources out there to gain self-independence. And that is the best thing for all people to try and gain that back.
Well, Michael, I think it's great you got to go experience the sports bar, but my guess is Jennifer was smiling somewhere because she was also by herself.
Yes.
doing something independent as well.
Yes.
So, that's wonderful.
And it's just getting back, with the step out event, of course we want to help people financially, but that to provide the resources, we have so many ideas as well, not just this. We want this to grow. We have so many ideas, but we just want people to get back to living life again and knowing that, yes, it's different. It can get better, but there's no need for you to be depressed in the moment, because you can still have fun. You can still live life. There's still so much to be thankful for. And we want to get people back to, like I said, gaining self-independence, even in some small way. Mm-hmm. To give themselves and the caregiver back, I hate to use the word normal, but get them back to some normal life again. So it's so much more than the financial aspect. It's getting back to living again and loving life it might be in a new way, but it's almost like with child eyes. You're experiencing everything for the first time again. And then, there's nothing more heartbreaking than, as Michael said, I told him to pray about what he was going to do with his life, because I didn't have the answer. There was no way I could give him the answer. And that was a heartbreaking thought for me, to think that he was never going to be able to do something. He needed a purpose. It's all about a purpose. He needed a purpose again. And I had no idea what that was going to be. So everyone needs a purpose. And I think that's what we want to help them realize as well.
Well, I believe, no pun intended, yes, there was, that you have found your purpose. And as Henry said, God works in mysterious ways. And the fact that you prayed to him and asked him for some guidance on what to do next means I think you guys are on the right path. So thank you very much for working through as Henry hinted at, our initial technical difficulties, but we worked through them.
Thank you.
And for spending an hour with us. That was truly inspiring. And this is why we do the podcast. Henry, thanks for navigating some of those questions. And Jennifer and Michael, we hope you guys have a wonderful, wonderful day. And again, you're an inspiration.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning in to the No Plateau podcast. Please make sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date on more stroke and brain injury recovery stories. The No Plateau podcast is intended to give you an insight into stroke and brain injury survivors' journeys. Any opinions given on this podcast are strictly the individual's, and we do not suggest that you necessarily hold the same viewpoints as anyone on this podcast. This podcast is intended to supplement stroke and brain injury survivors' recovery journey. Therefore, all content affiliated with this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health providers with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Reliance on any information provided by the No Plateau podcast is solely at your own risk.